My name is Arnaud Grignard.
And I'm Alison Crank, and we're running Unit 1 Urban Rhythms. I'm a UX designer and researcher, and I work a lot in video games, UX for immersive experiences, VR, MR, XR, as well as with AI.
And I'm a computer scientist. I am a researcher in a French institute called IRD, mainly working on complex system modeling, agent-based simulation applied to decision making. I'm also a research affiliate at the MIT Media Lab, working on mainly visualization, data visualization, agent-based modeling, and AI applied to urbanism. Okay, so this year, which is the second edition of the Urban Rhythm, as last year, we focus on, first of all, on data to try to understand the city. So one of the big challenges is to get some open source data from Melbourne city. And what we are trying to do is then to build a virtual environment, such as simulation or agent-based modeling, and also some VR environment that we develop with different software. The main goal, I would say, is to reproduce a kind of digital twin of the CBD in order to explore different scenarios. And so this year we are trying to mix both simulation, which is more on my side, and then Unity rendering in order to mix abstract representation of the city, but also very realistic.
I think in general it's also about adding a little layer of game design and interaction design to it, so that way we're making this as a tool not just for architects or urban designers, but also for people to really understand the impact the simulation has on the city, and if you do make some parameters happen, what that would actually be and how that would affect the city on a street level, actually. So we are trying to simulate that in a Unity environment, which is a game engine, in order for people to be able to project that speculative future.
Ideally, what we want to do is to couple those technologies. So having something very immersive with Unity, where you can almost use some environment like VR, and couple that with something more abstract, which is almost like a map, like a GIS map, using a software called GAMA platform. So that's what we are trying to do this year by also teaching the students, which is one of the challenge, to teach them programming using also those new tools. And ideally, at the end of the exhibition and at the end of the workshop, also to give the possibility to other users to use this tool as open source software.
So I guess my first perspective of Victoria, and in particular Melbourne and the CBD, because that's what we were investigating too, was that it's very similar in some ways to New York City, because the HODL grid is like New York, it's a grid format, except the streets are a lot narrower. And so you realize that the life on the city is really dependent on actually the time of day because of the shadows of the buildings. And also in terms of just transportation and accessibility, there's a lot of congestion. It's very difficult to get from one side of the city to the other because you're constantly waiting at traffic stops, which is why in New York people just jaywalk whenever. And that was something I didn't really realize until I arrived here. But I saw that correlation with America. But I think the other thing that was really interesting is once you're out of the CBD, you get these amazing panoramic views of the city. So it really that grid really sticks out. It's kind of like cookie cutter plopped in the middle of these other kind of more natural terrains with gardens and everything, which is really great because of the botanical gardens. You have a great view of the city, but it's very uniquely placed in that way, and it seems not very organically connected to the rest. So I found that really bizarre, but also really fascinating.
My perspective, I think, first of all, was the first time I came to Australia, so I didn't exactly know what I would see. I kind of agree with the fact that it has some kind of American grid vibe. It reminds me also a bit like Boston. And again, I will maybe repeat, but the fact that for me CBD is something very specific about Melbourne, and one of what we want to explore in this project is how to make, let's say, CBD looks more like the other area of Melbourne. Initially, I was pretty happy about the tram. I thought it was pretty well made and very easy actually to navigate in the city. And then we started also to explore some potential new way of mobility, such as maybe more bikes. I might have been surprised to see not as much bike as I would expected, even if it's growing. So that's something we want also to explore, like the new type of mobility. And this year also, that's something that I really realize is the lack of green actually in the CBD.
So something we learned, like based on the research that we've done, in particular about the CBD, is of course it is a patchwork. We have postmodern buildings, we have some old Victorian buildings, a lot of Victorian architecture, especially when you go further away from the city. So it's quite funny, it's a little bit chaotic. There's no, like, let's say one language of architectural style and form. It's a lot of different things. And it seems like in urban design, there was no like template. Like when you go to Venice, you know, everything's very Palladian and it looks all kind of united together. But the thing that's uniting all these buildings is this grid, which is where we get like some sort of symmetry and form. So it kind of fits together, even though everyone has their own thing going on, like the Spice Girls or something. But what's really interesting about that is, of course, we found that we have different building heights. It's a little bit, there's not that many regulations in general for that. And as a result, you know, we figured out that there's different types of microclimates that exist, a lot of wind tunnels that can result from that. And that, you know, there's the lack of some of these building codes, or at least on a city scale, you know, can lend itself to different surprising results in terms of just shadows in certain areas. The laneways, of course, were defined by the grid, which was made for carts and buggies. So the dimensions of the city is not like in Paris where you have a huge boulevard where you can have lots of light flooding those areas. And so as a result, the higher the buildings get, of course, those laneways become less and less light. And the other thing is that, you know, it is the most green, and I'm obsessed with animals, and I've been told many times that this is like the fox capital of the world, and I have not seen a single fox, and I have been out and about at crepuscular times to make sure I spot a fox, and I have not seen a single one. I haven't even seen an opossum. I've only seen pigeons. And so I'm wondering where these animals are, and even if there is a map about them, I don't believe they exist. And so this kind of, you know, this idea of this livability and this huge biodiversity, again, in the CBD, I know it's a little bit different than when you go outside, but the fact that, yeah, that this is actually something, a call to action, even with the pollen, like I don't see enough trees unless I'm like in a garden to assume that this is like a pollen capital of the world. Maybe if I had an allergy, I might think differently. And I do know we're coming in winter time, so it's very skewed data. But that was something that was a surprise for me.
So yeah, in regards to all the data collection that we did, I think there is some kind of difference between, I take one very simple example, like we try to collect all the data about biodiversity and trees, and actually when you map it on our tools, it seems that the CBD is pretty green, but actually there are lots of different trees that also seems to come from different, I guess, period, maybe due to the history, so lots of different species. And actually what's interesting is that also the architecture, what struck me from the beginning is that it looks like different patchwork of different style. There are many buildings that have their own identity. And then as a whole, I'm like, okay, yeah, Melbourne seems like lots of different identity together in how let's say the skyline can look, but also as a whole, like the Melbourne, the greater Melbourne seems also to be with different districts like CBD, Fitzroy, St Kilda, Brunswick. I don't think I will pronounce it well, but this patchwork I think is interesting. And so yeah, basically we tried initially to understand the mobility of people, like how do they use the different kind of mode, like tram, bicycle, car. That was one of the concerns of the first unit. And also we have been trying, that's what we are doing this year, to understand more everything but human. So what is the impact of the climate on the biodiversity, on the green spaces, So we are trying to mix this in order to make the city more livable, knowing that I discovered that, and I am pretty agree with this, that Melbourne is rated in some ranking fourth city in the world. So it will be hard to make it better, but that's what we are trying to explore.
So after these 2 years, and I've been here 3 times, I think, in person, but only in the winter. So I understand that that is a context that is very different. I had assumed in some ways, because there is such a lot of cultural things going on, that there would be more public life, like out and about in the city. But really what I saw is a lot, maybe it's also because of the weather, of course, but you know, it's really everyone goes into restaurants or cafes, and you don't really see it spilling out into the city except for maybe, you know, the main museum area, that big Federation Square. And other than that, like, it's really kind of locked away in different buildings. And that's very different from Paris, obviously, where I live. But I think that was something I was a little bit surprised about, because there is so much culture and things, and usually that I'm wondering where it's happening, like if it's all happening inside buildings or structures, and you know, do people in different demographics mix very well? Because it is a very vibrant city with lots of different type of people from all over the world. Like you get a lot of international students, you get people from Asia, you get people from Australia, so there's a huge mix, and I'm just wondering, you know, where in public spaces do they all come together? And where that can happen. And I also know that it's wintertime, and maybe along the summertime in the Yarra, that's probably full of people. But even so, when I'm running along that, I don't really see that many people gathering, actually. It's just people moving from one place to another. But that, yeah, I think that was my big assumption.
What we would like to spread is, first of all, how to communicate on the pace, the rhythm of a city through data. So we are working with simple visualization, simple interactive tools, so that any public, any citizen can have a better sense of what's happening in the city. And what we want to focus also is more also about some sustainability urban planning, and how any plans can impact. First of all, what is the impact of climate or microclimate on the livability of the city, whether it's for human, but whether it's for biodiversity in general, animals, but also plants. So that's something a message that we'd like to spread. Sustainability science, impact of climate on the cities, and mobility too. But again, the goal of these 3 years is to mix all those insights in order to see the city as a complex system, but also to try to understand it as a whole, and see what is the impact of specific interventions.
And I guess for me, I think the thing that we want people to take away from the work that we've done is that indeed, with the simulation, and the fact is not about adding more green is great for the city. We have an ecosystem, which is where people, skyscrapers, animals, plants, microclimates, everything have to work together. So, you know, by going to the extreme in one way, or for only adding a little bit, you realize that this one thing has an impact on the whole. And so to understand that it's like a delicate balance between different things and different variables that come in that might change due to climate, due to new weather patterns, can have an impact on the whole city. So to understand that it's not just one way is the right way, but actually it's about finding that balance, and that balance is thrown off course every day, so that you understand that, you know, it's always about finding that balance in between, but also having some sort of flexibility in it as well, because a city that has to function this way, if you increase a certain amount of things, of course the transportation system is messed up, and so it's a complex thing. But by making it simplified in this kind of simplified simulation, we are hoping that at least people can understand it in a way that is really hard to describe, since it's quite abstract and quite complex.
To go into that, I think what we are trying, even though it's also still a research question, is like to be as much as possible close to the reality. So this is thanks to data that are provided by the city, and also it's not because we are using computer and algorithm that we are proposing what is the best scenario, but we are proposing a tool that gives you the possibility to explore those scenarios with the right amount of, let's say, realism. But again, it's a tool to explore scenarios. It's not a tool to propose scenarios. It's really to make the tool as objective as possible. This is more a tool to debate, to discuss, and to have an idea of what's happening in your city.